I've got about £1,000 worth from some axes on the way, and I've got a bunch of bows and as well.
Well, that is probably the most disturbing bit of your entire film footage, because that's a person who's clearly arming themselves. They are boxing and weightlifting for a reason, to get fit to attack people. I would be very disturbed. As a police officer watching that, I'd be very interested in monitoring that individual and what that individual was about.
You've just seen 20 minutes of conversations with Active Club England. What are your first thoughts having seen that footage?
What is disturbing is the way over the last decade or so, this kind of language and behaviour and activity almost feels like, far-right commentary has become normalised. And I find that very depressing. Now, what I find disturbing about all of that is a lot of them will never go from training and talking a hard game with their mates to actually taking action, but somebody will. So organisations like this, talking the way they're talking, will attract young people, often very malleable, some of them very vulnerable. These are radicalisers in everything but name.
And to someone walking by one of those gatherings, boxing class, push-ups, pull-ups on a Saturday morning, this is, on the face of it, innocent stuff.
The fact that it's all white in a city as diverse as London might be a bit unusual. Wouldn't be unusual in lots of other parts of the country. Unless you were listening to what they were saying, and some of this language has taken place in public. I mean, some of the stuff they're saying would breach hate crime legislation and public order legislation without a doubt. But they're clearly being coached in how to stay the right side of the law.
And you see parallels here with National Action in those early stages of the group.
Yes. And of course, it's easy to categorise this as this is angry young white men on the far right, but the ideology of training for a war is an ideology we've seen in other extremist types, certainly in political Islamist groups, training or organisation around gyms. That was not an uncommon factor in some of our investigations either.
And which brings us to the comparison with Anjem Choudhury. Just explain what an organisation like this might have in common with a group like Al-Muhajirun.
Anjem Choudhury was a classic radicaliser who was trying to encourage young people to join, a very extreme religious cause. In the old days, radicalisers, whether it was somebody in a madrasa or in a mosque or on the far right in a pub or in the back rooms of pubs, they would organise one-to-one in face-to-face preaching, for want of a better word, with a small group of dedicated people. The younger, the more vulnerable, the better, the more malleable to the ideas, the more senior and articulate the preacher, the more easy it is to influence. And those people, you never see them take any action. They're not going to put themselves in the firing line. They're looking for somebody to use to further their cause, and in Anjem Choudhury's case, to commit extreme violence. And from what I've heard from your filming so far is these are people preparing to commit acts of violence. So eventually they will attract somebody who has no problem with that whatsoever, because we've seen a lot of vulnerable, mostly young men who are attracted to violence, and they're searching for a cause, and here's a cause being presented to them.
There will be people among the group and people watching who will say, this is pub talk, they're keeping fit, they're looking after themselves, they have a view of society, they're simply anti-immigration. What is it that they are doing that is beyond the pale?
Incitement to violence. So that it's very clear the racism, the white supremacy, the anti-Semitism is severe. The language is severe. That language is not something they could use publicly anywhere, either online or offline. And they know that. They're being very careful about what they say and what they do. I would be incredibly concerned. It only takes one person to commit a violent act, and people like that will be attracted to this group and they will get support from the group. And even if 90% of the group never want to cross that line and commit a violent act, there'll be 1 in 10 who does. And this is giving that person comfort and support. That is incredibly dangerous.
And what options are available to the police to deal with an organisation like this at this stage? perhaps inciting, not planning a terrorist attack or not planning violence. I mean, can you just sort of explain what options are available to law enforcement to tackle what is clearly a problem?
Well, if you're inciting racial hatred online or in a public place with the intention of threatening or being abusive or insulting someone, you've committed a criminal offence. So the option's very clear. They can be arrested and charged and put in prison, depending on the nature of those threats. If they cross a Rubicon into the counterterrorism space, they'll be looked at by my successors and the security service. And they won't be around for much longer after that in terms of, you saw the dismantling of national action. And there's a debate about whether you close these people down and censor them entirely when they're not crossing the law, or whether you bring to light the way they think and feel and show the public what these people are. I've come to the conclusion it is much better to show the public what these people are, because 30 years of policing has convinced me that the vast majority of people are good and want to do the right thing. These people are relatively small, and once you expose them for what they are, I think they will stay small.
30 years of policing, as you say. Tell me about your proudest moment during those 3 decades.
My proudest moment was dismantling national action, persuading a government that they needed to be proscribed after their horrendous belittling of the Joe Cox murder. I mean, she was the very best of us and they were the very worst. Amber Rudd, very grateful to that Home Secretary who prescribed them. When she prescribed them, it gave us the tools to be able to dismantle them, and that is one of my proudest moments in policing. And also having to convince, a sceptical government and a slightly sceptical security service back in the 2017 that this was a rising problem in our country, and that we opened the eyes of the government, the public and the security community to this being a genuine problem.
Why the scepticism?
I think the scepticism was partly this can't possibly be taking place in our country. This is the Great Britain. This is the United Kingdom. It's far too fine a country for this to be happening here. We are a tolerant country. There is a small percentage of people, and you filmed them, who do not feel that way. And I think people thought we were taking our eye off the greatest threat, which was at the time the Islamist ISIS threat, immediately having followed the Al-Qaeda threat. And for some reason they thought, well, you're concentrating on far-right extremism and you're taking your eye off that ball. No, we weren't. We were interested in people committing extreme acts, going from extremism to terrorism. And we didn't care what your ideology was. We were interested in finding, identifying and capturing and imprisoning terrorists. What I was saying is some of those terrorists are not political Islamists. Some of them are far-right white supremacists. Pay attention, it's come to our shores. I'm not the only country to feel like this. My counterparts across Western Europe have been dealing with this. It's here too.
You talk about national action being the successor to the National Front. Could a group like Active Club England, Active Club more broadly, be the successor to national action?
Yes, easily. And there were plenty of successor groups to national action, but every time one popped up, we prescribed them and we took those out. If this particular club takes their rhetoric into real-world action, they'll find the might of the security service and counter-terrorism policing will be immediately upon them.
And do you think the enthusiasm is still there within the intelligence and security community?
Absolutely. I mean, those people know what they're doing and they're still very actively engaged in this.